DPRK will send a top senior official to the Republic of Korea as the Winter Olympics kick off. What's the intention of this high-level visit? And U.S. President Donald Trump must decide this week if he will release a controversial Democratic memo responding to a Republican memo that accuses the FBI of abusing surveillance laws. If the memo becomes public, what will be the repercussions? Welcome to the point, live from Beijing. I'm Li Xin. The Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or DPRK, confirmed that it is sending its highest-ranking official in years to visit the Republic of Korea, or ROK, amid an ongoing thaw in relations over the upcoming Winter Olympic Games. Yong Nam, the president of the Presidium of the Supreme People's Assembly of the DPRK, will be leading a delegation of high-ranking officials to celebrate the events. Some say this visit will open opportunities for inter-peninsular dialogue. Meanwhile, U.S. Vice President Mike Pence, who will be attending the opening ceremony of the Games, has accused the DPRK of trying to hijack the Winter Games and says that he will try to stop it. So how is the situation likely to develop? Joining me for the discussion are Dr. Tat Yan Kong, reader in comparative politics from the Department of Politics and International Studies at SOAS University of London, and Professor Sung-yoon, Professor of Korean Studies at the Fletcher School of Tufts University in Massachusetts, the U.S. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Professor Lee, as the chairman of the Presidium of the Supreme People's Assembly, Yong Nam is nominally the head of state of the DPRK according to its constitution. What do you think his visit to the ROK signifies?
It signifies North Korea's serious intent to advance its interests by its charm offensive. Now, this on the surface is nothing extraordinary. Every nation engages in PR, public diplomacy, and North Korea has already won some benefits without even the Olympics having begun by its image makeover. North Korea now comes across as the party that's more interested in peace, while the Trump administration comes across as the petulant party. So that's a PR victory already for North Korea. Yong Nam, as you mentioned, is a figurehead, symbolic head of state. He's not the de facto number 2 man in North Korea. That's one reason why Mr. Kim has enjoyed such political longevity. His visit creates some protocol issues for the South Korean government. For example, does South Korea put Yong Nam ahead of Vice President Mike Pence and so on? But in the end, I think North Korea is very good at playing this kind of PR game, and Yong Nam's visit will create a lot of excitement.
Dr. Tat Yan Kong, what is your take on the significance of Yong Nam's visit? Is it purely PR? Is it purely symbolic? Do you think there is any trust or any sincerity at all from this part of the North to send Yong Nam in a kind of demonstration of their sincerity to sit down and talk or reconcile with the South?
Well, we don't actually know for sure. We have to wait to see how things unfold. But Yong Nam, as we've pointed out, is symbolically the North Korean head of state, the chair of the Supreme People's Assembly, and by rank he is suitable for a meeting with South Korean President Moon Jae-in. You know, at least on the surface, you can say that the North Koreans are taking inter-Korean relations seriously, because this is the most senior delegate to be officially sent to South Korea. You know, if the North Koreans do not engage, if they do not talk, we say they're being unresponsive. But if they do talk, then we say they're trying to score a propaganda victory. Now, both sides have their interests. The North Koreans, they seek the easing of sanctions and economic assistance. They seek the cessation of the joint drills or their suspension, and they seek South Korea as a bridge to the United States. But this is not only of advantage to the North Korean side. For the South Korean side, you know, engaging with North Korea, there are some substantial benefits to be had. The reunion of separated families. develop mechanisms of communication, especially on the military side, and you know, to prevent the outbreak of incidents. And also to communicate to the North Koreans the American side and the other side's view on the weapons of mass destruction, that there must be some moves towards suspension and denuclearization. So I don't think we should simply see it as a unilateral North Korean win.
Professor Lee, according to a presidential aide, IOK President Moon Jae-in will meet in a fashion so-called spontaneously with Kim Yong Nam. What do you think is behind the usage of such a term, spontaneously, and what could we expect from this kind of meeting?
Well, we know President Moon is having an official meeting, even dinner, with the Vice President of the United States, also with Prime Minister Abe, and he will meet with other world leaders. Of course, he will reach out to the North Korean delegation and have a meeting with Kim Yong Nam. But I guess for now, South Korea, the government does not want to paint that as an official meeting, because invariably in that instance, questions of denuclearization will come up. That is, the expectation on the part of observers and the opposition party will be that President Moon should bring those thorny issues up, when it will be very difficult to do that. Kim Yong Nam's visit is significant because, yes, he is the highest ranking North Korean official ever to visit South Korea, but at the same time, he has no real power. He is a messenger. And for the U.S. Vice President, this is a thorny issue. He doesn't want to be buddy-buddies with Kim Yong Nam. He doesn't want to be too warm, too cozy with Kim. At the same time, he doesn't want to be perceived as the Grinch, the party that wants to snub the North Korean delegation. In 1954, when the U.S. Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, snubbed Premier Zhou Enlai in Geneva at the Geneva conference, when Premier Zhou extended his hand to shake hands, John Foster Dulles just ignored him and walked by. We don't want, the United States does not want that kind of PR disaster. At the same time, the U.S. is wary of being perceived as malleable, that it can be influenced by North Korea's outreach.
Does that explain, Professor Lee, let me continue asking you this question. Does that explain the kind of invitation by the United States to have the father of Otto Warmbier, the American student who was imprisoned in the DPRK for over a year, who died shortly after he was sent back to the U.S.? What do you think is the consideration behind Mike Pence's arrangement to have the father of Otto Warmbier with him to be at the present of the Winter Games?
I am personally all for highlighting the nature of the North Korean regime, which, according to a monumental landmark UN study from 2014, makes the allegation that North Korea's crimes against humanity are, quotes, in quotes, they do not have parallel in the contemporary world, end quote. But there is a better occasion for highlighting these issues, and to come to visit South Korea with the parents of Otto Warmbier, the college student who was detained in North Korea for some 18 months and then sent home finally while he was in a coma and died a few days later. That is not good PR, because again, it paints the U.S. as the spoiler, as the party pooper, as the party that is petulant and bellicose, while North Korea comes across as more interested in reconciliation and peace. When it comes to PR, I think that the North Koreans are maybe a notch or two above the Americans.
Dr. Kuhn, what is your take on the situation? Obviously, the United States is trying to exert maximum pressure, both in terms of economic sanctions and diplomatic pressure, and as Professor Lee pointed out, to highlight the human rights abuses in the DPRK. Do you think this is going to open wider the window of opportunities that is appearing, or make it shut down altogether?
Well, Vice President Pence is trying to convey a message of reproach towards North Korea, especially on the issue of human rights, being accompanied by the parents of Otto Warmbier. the thing is, regarding human rights in North Korea will not improve unless the society develops. The society will not develop unless there is economic change. And there will not be substantial economic change unless there is engagement from outside and the development of linkages between the North Korean economy and outside economies. You know, much depends on what happens after the Olympics, I think. Whether the North Koreans can continue to exercise self-restraint on weapons of mass destruction. If by the end of the Paralympics on March the 18th, they continue their suspension of the tests of rockets and nuclear weapons, then they would have satisfied the 60-day suspension threshold mentioned by some American officials as the condition for talks. And you know, I hope that the North Koreans, you know, grasp this opportunity of a liberal administration in South Korea, which is interested in peace, and to replace nuclear weapons with a regional peace mechanism. Much depends on President Trump and whether he's listening to the advice of South Korea and diplomats like Secretary Tillerson, and seeking to balance pressure with engagement.
Right.
You know, at the moment, from the United States, what we see is mainly pressure, but very little engagement.
Right. Professor Lee, let me give you 20 seconds, please. What do you think of the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's suggestion that immediately after the Olympic Games, both the U.S. and the ROK should resume their joint military drills, not to scale it down?
That exhortation by the Japanese Prime Minister betrays the sense of nervousness that is real on the part of the Japanese government and the U.S. government, that South Korea is slightly inching away from its allies and tacit ally of Japan, and is moving closer to North Korea, holding inter-Korean talks without informing the U.S. of the substance of talks. So the U.S. is a little displeased, and in that regard, North Korea has already won a small victory by driving wedges among those three nations.
Thank you very much. We have to leave it there. My two guests, Professor Sung-yoon Lee, Professor of Korean Studies at the Fletcher School of Tufts University in Massachusetts, U.S., and Dr. Tat Yan Kong, Reader in Comparative Politics at the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. You're watching The Point with me, Lee Sheen. I'll be back right after this short break. U.S. President Donald Trump must decide by Friday if a controversial Democratic memo will be released. The memo is responding to Republican accusation that senior FBI and Justice Department officials misled a secret surveillance court. The release of the memo may pit the White House and fellow Republicans against the Democrats, law enforcement and intelligence agencies. So what will be Trump's next move? Will U.S. bipartisan relations be further ruptured? Joining me in the studio are Harvey Zodin and Aina Tangen, current affairs commentators. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. So, I'm not really understand this story. Please, Aina, explain it to us. How many memos are we talking about, and exactly what is going on? You can look at me, both of you, please.
Okay. Well, the memo, there's the first memo, which was put out by the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, and it's highly unusual for them to do this. There was no report. He's
so
just
we're talking
writing
about two memos?
Two memos. One
okay.
put out by the Republicans, and that was by the chairman of the group, who was temporarily ostracized from the group because he had some contacts with the White House. So he's kind of a shadowy figure in all of this. But he insisted that this memo had to be put out there to discredit what he saw was what they call a deep state conspiracy against Donald Trump. And this was all brought into motion because they found some personal emails between two FBI people who actually had a romantic relationship, discussing the fact that they didn't care for Donald Trump. Now, one of them was very much involved in the whole issue involving Hillary Clinton and the investigation there, and then he was subsequently involved in this. So the Republicans said, look, there's an appearance of bias, therefore there's bias, we want to get this memo out there. So that was sent above the objections of the FBI, who said, look, this contains classified information, we do not want this out, this is highly irregular, this is not a report, you're sending out a memo and you're making it public. Highly unusual. Now the Democrats said, look, if they put out a memo, we want to put out a rebuttal memo. So initially the Republicans said no because they said it hasn't been vetted, and that means that it has to be reviewed by the FBI and then declassified by the President. And that's where we are today. The committee has voted unanimously to let the Democratic memo be put out, but that means it's being sent to the White House, and now Donald Trump has to make a decision, along with the FBI, who's also going to have some input as to whether the information they want to talk about in this memo, it can be declassified.
So, Harvey, how important is this whole spat between the two parties and concerning the release or whether or not of these memos? Because all the TV stations are talking about this now.
I remember, you're too young to remember, Heiner might remember, a Chubby Checkers song from 1962, Limbo Rock. And the line that keeps coming back from that is, how low can you go? And this is all about politics and how low you can go because of the fact that this is just political theater. As a Fox commentator said, Fox, President Trump's favorite network, he said, this memo, the first memo, is a weapon of mass distraction. So the game here is to get people's minds off of the Russian investigation and to lead them on to something else. And that's what the Republicans are attempting to do, and they've done it somewhat well, although there was a lot of pushback. We have to wait and see what happens with the Democratic rebuttal.
Why did the committee change their mind about whether or not to release the rebuttal memo? What happened in between? Can you guess, Ina?
Well, I think popular outcry was there. They felt that it was politically not good because they're in essence silencing the Democrats. Now, obviously, there's a political calculation that goes into it. What the Republican side is pushing, some of them, not all of them, because remember, Trey Gowdy, who's the only person who actually, on the committee, who was involved in this, who's actually seen the memo, all right? Now, what we're talking about is there was an application made by the FBI to a court, and we don't have to. The FBI said, look, we believe that we have somebody who's involved or could be involved in foreign espionage, all right? And this person was a person of interest to the FBI long before he had, and is still somebody of interest. He was involved in Russian matters prior to being involved with Trump. So afterwards they said, look, we want to pursue this person, we want wiretaps, we want the ability to do that. Now they renewed that particular...
Oh, you're talking about Page.
Carter Page.
Carter Page.
Yes. So Carter Page was a person of interest. They were trying to figure out what was going on. They renewed the wiretaps and everything, the surveillance things, because they had to apply to these to get these. This is the rule of law, sending in. But it goes to kind of what legal standards and what passes for it. Now, what Trump is trying to do is convince everybody that the FBI and the CIA are two groups who are against his presidency, and that anything that they're involved in should be looked on as suspect, that because there are people out there trying to get him.
So that's why Trump said this memo totally vindicates him.
Exonerates.
However, how can a memo written up by the Republican Party clear a Republican president of any wrongdoing?
It doesn't exonerate him. the 2 points that the special counsel are looking into are not covered by that memo. So one point is about collusion with the Russians in the campaign, and there's another point as well. But the memo doesn't cover those things, and so the memo is totally irrelevant. I think that the Republicans did not release the Democratic rebuttal initially for strategic reasons, actually, and I think it was to let the Republican memo out there to without a proper response for a number of days. And as Einar said, when there was some blowback, they decided to release the memo or recommend it.
Well, there are actually 5 areas that Mueller is looking into. Okay, and obstruction of justice is one of them, and that's becoming more and more serious because that's something that's provable. The rest of this stuff is kind of out there. They've gotten some people. Manafort and others have been charged with money laundering. There have been Flynn has been charged with lying, along with a number of other aides. But in this particular case, the Democrats did in fact submit their version of what they wanted a memo only a few hours before Trump actually authorized the Republican memo. So they were saying that we need time to do this. So this is how they've played it. I'm not disagreeing with Harvey that this is political theater. Obviously it is. And both sides are, as you said, how low can you go? But, you know, this should not be a distraction. This is one small issue involving Carter Page and whether or not a court should have given the right to interview. Now, there's no question that Carter Page was involved with the Russians, that he had frequent contacts, that it was unclear if he was being truthful at times about what those conversations entailed. He's had documented, detailed testimony over 30 or 40 hours of testimony, and it's quite clear that there's reason to suspect him. The question, when Donald Trump says, I've been totally vindicated, on what? I mean, he's just simply saying because that you know, were looking at this guy Carter Page, because he was associated with me, therefore I'm exonerated. It doesn't really make any sense.
What would be the impact if President Trump decides to release the memo or not? Harvey?
The president has a number of choices. First choice, release it, declassify it, and so it's the same treatment as he gave the Republican memo. Another choice is to release it but not declassify it, in which case the committee members are not allowed to talk about the content, as strange as that seems. And the third choice is not to release it, in which case it goes to the full Congress, and they'll need at least 24 Republicans to vote with the Democrats if they're going to get that released. I think, in a way, Trump is not in a good position. If he doesn't release it, he looks like he has something to hide. If he does, I think the memo is probably going to be quite well written and have strong rebuttals.
I think in the end he'll say that there's too many items of national security to be involved. He will rely, actually, ironically, on the FBI's assessment that to detail all of the different other things that were included in this application to the judge to get the warrant to surveil Carter Page, that they would release too much information. I mean, the FBI, remember, was against the release of even the Republican memo because they said, look, this is detailing our secrets. Now people know what we know, and they're not supposed to do that. The Democrats have to, all right, to rebut this, get at all the other information and say, look, it wasn't just about this Steele report, all right? There are many other things and reasons why this was done. And then, you know, ironically, Trump, who's been attacking the FBI, can now turn around and says, well, I can't release it because the FBI says there's too many sensitive things.
So indeed, more and more dirty laundry being forced to be washed outside and hang outside. What is this going to do to the domestic politics of the United States? Do you think it's going to have some kind of a negative impact?
I think the circus continues, and I think that the already much tarnished and maligned image of the United States internationally is going to go down even more, and domestically I don't see how it can get much worse. I mean, it's at rock bottom. So you have a situation now where President Trump is responsible for introducing the least amount passing the least amount of legislation of any presidents going back to President Eisenhower. So it's total gridlock and zero summing. This is not what we need given all the problems of our day and age.
One of the issues is that everyone was afraid, the Democrats were afraid, and even some Republicans, that Donald Trump was going to use this memo and say, look, Mueller is tainted. I'm going to fire the number 2 at the FBI because he's in charge of appointing this guy, and we're just going to get rid of this. I'm going to appoint somebody in new, maybe to head the FBI, maybe in the second, maybe clean house completely. The question is, does that lead to the appearance that he is in fact obstructing justice, that he keeps firing everybody who's investigating him? And this is what his lawyers, his White House lawyer is saying, you can't do that. He was the one, McGahn was the one, the White House counsel has said, I will resign if you fire Mueller. This is a few things. Now, Donald Trump says that's fake news, but there are more than one source who's saying that, no, this is what happened. So it would be, I think Donald Trump, naturally, he likes to strike out at anybody he perceives who is against him or not loyal to him. We saw this with Comey. And it's quite clear that he would do it. So the question is, will he go that ultimate step? Will he try to manufacture something so that he has a reason to go after these people and get rid of them?
I guess we'll just keep a close eye on the situation and wait till Friday. Thank you very much, gentlemen. As best as you can explain it, I think it is still a domestic thing to understand, right? A little bit complicated, but let's try to understand and taking the impact of... Harvey, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, just the good news is, for once, China isn't implicated or looked at negatively, so I think that's the only good piece of news I could see.
Well, I mean, China is gaining because the more this kind of circus goes on, the better China and more stable China looks.
Well, let's see. Many thanks to my two guests, Ina Tangen and Harvey Zoding, current affairs commentator. And you have been watching The Point with me, Liu Xin. As usual, follow me on Facebook or Twitter using the handle The Point with Alex. Download the application called CGTN to watch the show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. We've got The Point.